Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Alana Hareda and I'm the curator here at the Transcona Museum. And with me today is
Jennifer. I'm the assistant curator here.
And today we are going to be talking about Transcona's World War II Cordite Plant. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below if you're watching us on Facebook Live, or if you have joined us via Zoom today, you can leave your comments in the chat. We will have a question and answer period at the end, but if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to ask your question and we'll do our best to get to them. So before we get started, we will give the land acknowledgement.
So the Transcona Museum resides on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation.
So to set the background, to set the scene, to give more information about the Cordite Plant, war was declared in 1939 and work began on the home front. So communities pulled together to join up in the war effort. Transcona had a war efforts committee that raised funds and supplies for the enlisted overseas. So Transcona was very active on the home front with the war efforts committee. We sponsored the HMCS Transcona. There were lots of fundraising campaigns and letters and like small care packages sent to soldiers. So Transcona was very involved. The Manitoba government lobbied to have federal war efforts such as munition factory manufacturing to take place in the province. Water and electricity was cheap and available. Manitoba was a transit hub with the railway, so easy to move those goods across the country. There were workers looking for work. Munition factories also being so far away from the battlefield were seen as a plus for eliminating risks with sabotage or the enemy and spies. Not that it wasn't a concern and there were strict security protocols, but it was just an added bonus. So in 1940, the federal government announced it would be building a cordite plant in Manitoba. So what is cordite? Cordite is a family of smokeless propellants, and it was originally developed in the United Kingdom during World War I to replace gunpowder as a military propellant. So like gunpowder, cordite is classified as a low explosive because of its low burning rates and consequently low brisance. And it resembles brown corded twine. So on this image that I'm pointing to at the moment, this here is replica cordite. Because this is a photograph sectioned of a British 18-pound field gun shrapnel round from World War I. And this is reproduced. It's not actual live cordite that a museum has in their collection, but that's what cordite looks like. So that was the main manufacturing, but it wasn't everything that was done.
I'd also just like to point out that Transcona also has a history of munitions war efforts in the World Wars. During the First World War, one of the car shops, the Transcona shops, was converted into a munitions factory where they produced 18-pound artillery shells for about a 3-year period, and they worked around the clock for this. So there is a history here in Transcona.
Definitely. Well, and with the railway right here, easy shipping. So the Cordite plant was actually located in Springfield, but is often referred to as the Transcona Cordite plant. But technically it was outside of the boundary of Transcona. So the site was selected in Springfield 1114E. This is information that I found in a local history book, Springfield, the first rural municipality. And it was just east of the town of Transcona, and the land was expropriated. And the act of expropriating, or it's the action of the state in taking or modifying property rights of an individual to exercise its sovereignty. So they purchased the land from individuals to build this cordite plant. And I don't know how much of a say the farmers got for that. So It was a fertile section of land, 1114E. In late October 1940, there were a number of farmers who were expropriated. So Bruce Eady, Alfred Gavag, John Shuffett. Sorry, I am very bad at pronouncing names.
So the farmers were Bruce Eady, Alfred Gavaga, John Sheffick, and Joe Ferber.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. And it seems that that section of land was the Eady Dairy and the Dodge Dairy were both actually incorporated on that piece of land. Now it says that over 800 acres or about 1 square mile was used for the plant. I did some Googling. 1 square mile is actually 640 acres. So it was a bit more than 1 square mile. So it's just different sources I've seen have said 1 square mile or 800 acres, but it's a fairly large area. Construction started in 1941 and was completed for $20 million. So it was built by the Canadian and British governments under the banner of the Allied War Supplies Corporation. So planning for the site began in 1940. Construction was completed in 1941. It opened June 1941 and was operated by a Crown Corporation, Defense Industries Limited. So a lot of times staff are referred to as DIL employees. And the photo that you see, this is the old Hummock School, number 256, which was on the land at one time that was then later used for the Cordite Plant. In 1940, the school property was sold to the Department of Munitions and Supply for $4,700 for the site of the Cordite Plant. So I was able to actually find a photo of the school that was on the land, or that the building was sold to for the Cordite Plant. Some of the sources are a little old, so it's conflicting. So the Cordite Plant itself, apparently during construction, local farmers helped out with hauling materials by team and sleigh and truck. It consisted of 230 buildings, and I've also read up to 250 buildings, and they were all spread out to make up the plant. And the reason they were spread out was in case there was an explosion, then the whole plant wouldn't necessarily go up. It would just, maybe just one building would be damaged instead of many buildings. Excavated earth was placed to the south in large mounds around the nitroglycerin area to protect those buildings in case of explosion. So these are the nitroglycerin buildings, and this is a hand-drawn map that we have in our collection. So it's possibly not accurate to detail, and it even says all buildings are not shown here. A powerhouse with 2 very high chimneys. There was a large machine shop and other shops were built. There was a large staff house for 200 people built on the Dodge Dairy site. The building was 2 stories high, long, wide, and in an E shape, with conveniences for a modern hotel, which I believe may be this here. To the southeast of the staff house, a fire reservoir was constructed and lined with fieldstone hauled in from Enola. And this was created in case of an emergency fire, as water in the pipe would maybe not flow fast enough. Also, they felt it could be easy to sabotage the water pipeline in from the south, so they wanted to have a supply of water on hand. Work apparently continued around the clock. To observing residents at dawn, it seemed like at dawn, a new building seemed to mushroom overnight. Like all of a sudden, there were just new buildings. In the middle section were the concrete ranges. So these are the ranges right here. And it's here where cordite, so it's that brown corded, almost looks like spaghetti, which was used in the munition, was pressed out, packaged into bales, and then packaged for shipment. It was stored in 6, apparently the one source reads 6 magazines ready for shipment, that went out by rail on the plant. So there is a rail line coming through here. Residents who were employed there recall the cotton storage area, the wood pulp preparation, mixed acid storage, nitration, steaming, and finishing area to the south, and the main government laboratory. There was a telephone exchange, fire hall, laundry, a hospital near the main gatehouse to the west. There was an 8-foot tall, whoop, too fast, sorry, 8-foot tall fence that surrounded the plant. With cinder guard, there were also cinder guard houses where guards would walk the fence line. There were 5 guard houses to the mile and an electric light pole every 100 feet. Guards moved from one shelter to the next apparently every 20 minutes as heavy security was maintained. So over the course of the cordite plant, it didn't just produce cordite. There were 30,000 tons of gun cotton produced, 14,500 tons of nitroglycerin, 75,000 tons of nitric acid, and 16,700 tons of sulfuric acid, as well as the 65,300 tons of cordite. So the plant was quite busy.
Could say a boomin'.
Somebody left a comment on our Facebook page about this talk being like a booming, or they're looking forward to it with a bang or something like that. So work at the plant. So again, I mentioned the plant opened in June 1941. At its peak, 4,200 people worked there, and operations took place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. However, I did find reference to a number of small shutdowns that happened, or they had to retool the manufacturing process. And that seems to be because the output of the plant seemed to vary. Sometimes there was more need to produce, and other times not as much. So there were shutdowns at that time. There were a series of layoffs and rehirings as the progress of war demanded an increased production or brought about cancellation of various types of production. Were quickly outmodeled by the developments on the fighting front. So they were taking they were creating what was needed for the front based on what the front's needs. There were calls at different times looking for workers. April 27th, 1944 newspaper article, the Winnipeg Tribune, stated they were looking for 300 students to work at the cordite plant. Excuse me. Not used to talking as much. In 1943 was the first reference I could find for women being hired to work in production at the plant. I think women may have worked there prior to that, but maybe it seems like more in administrative roles. But this was the first time that women were hired for production. August 30th, 1943 article, Cordite Plant hires women. There were 125 women hired. The work manager, W.D. Irwin, said that women would replace men in certain phases of plant operation. And the hiring of women was necessary because of the shortage of suitable male workers. It's also stated in that article that this was the first time that they were hiring women to do men's jobs. It also seems that when they did need to lay off staff, it seemed to be women were the first ones to be laid off. An article, August 17th, 1945, Cordite Plant to close, 1,100 to be laid off, states that when this layoff happened, there were no more women employed in production as they had all been laid off prior. Pardon me. There were trains that came in from Winnipeg that came to the plant. So not everyone who worked at the plant actually ended up moving to Transcona or directly to this area. There were 3 trains that left Winnipeg, depending on the shift, and then 3 trains that left the plant going back into Winnipeg, depending on the shift. There were also parking passes and a parking lot for staff to park there. And heard stories of other people, not necessarily plant workers, blending into the crowd to catch the train to Winnipeg. I saw reference to that a couple of times. So the photo here, this is a shot of the cordite plant and just you can see all the buildings and how they're all spread out. don't know the layout good enough to actually say what building is what, because they're also spread out. There wasn't a lot of information out there produced, because this was essentially almost a top secret munitions factory. You know, they weren't allowed to talk about it, to say like, oh yes, this is definitely this building. This is definitely here. Safety at the plant was very important. There's definitely strict adherence to the safety rules and plans. There was no metal allowed or anything that could cause a spark. So no zippers, no metal buttons, no matches. There was absolutely no smoking. You know, hair had to be tied up and out of the way. One source did say that, from the Springfield municipality book that I mentioned earlier, that people did see guards smoking while they were on patrol, walking the fence line. But people did go to jail for smoking at the Cordite plant, or even sneaking in matches. I read one story of an individual. They were hiding matches in their boot. So it wasn't like, oh, I forgot to check my pockets. It was, you purposely snuck these in. So the two articles you can see here that I got from the Winnipeg Tribune mentioned that they were smoking on site, and then also carrying matches.
And it wasn't a small slap on the wrist punishment either. You were saying that some of these guys were, 6 months or something like that.
Yeah,
in jail.
Yeah, and fired. You were fired from the job. You are going to go to jail. You have a hefty fine that you have to pay. And it wasn't just men. I found reference of women who were also caught smoking. And I guess if you think at the time, smoking was very much a thing that pretty much everyone probably did.
It was also a way to calm the nerves.
And you're working in this job where you're making things that specifically go boom. So you might be more nervous and need to calm down. Now, apparently there were buildings in our rule book that we have, and we're going to be showing some of the artifacts we have later in the presentation, says that smoking is absolutely prohibited except for in buildings where it is allowed. So there may have been a smoking building, but going through everything and everything as I've read about checking to make sure you don't have matches and stuff like that, it's possible there might not have been smoking on site. Maybe you had to, go outside the gate to smoke. I don't know. And as I mentioned, we have some of the rule books from the Cordite plant. We have some of the newsletters that were produced that often had, how to work safe information in there. And not only would there be, articles in the paper, but also in those Cordite reviews would be notices about people who were caught smoking or having matches. And I also found this really interesting notice about, please, when you're taking the train back to Winnipeg, don't jump off the train before it pulls into the station at Winnipeg. That is very dangerous, and please don't do it, as it has become a problem. So I guess people were jumping off the train before it came to the stop at the Winnipeg station. And while the plant was in operation, there was actually only one death. And that was caused, it was a truck driver, and the Cordite was the truck was overpacked. It caught a spark and exploded. That was the only death that happened while in operation. I saw an article from 1943 saying we've only had 12 injuries, and the most serious was a broken ankle or an injured ankle. So safety was of the utmost importance. So staffing at the plant, with many steps involved in the production of Cordite, there were many different jobs that needed to be filled. And again, at the peak of production, it employed over 4,200 people. So the next series of slides have some of the images we have of people who worked at the Cordite plant. So with this image that you see, We don't know what Building 19 was or what job these individuals did, but the donor's mother is in this picture. So sometimes we do know individuals who are in the pictures, but not necessarily what jobs they did. But if you ever watch the TV show Bomb Girls, which they were making munitions for World War II, that's how in the show the girls did their hair, and the women did their hair. And so looking at this, this picture is just, the quality is amazing. Some other ones, the photo on the left, now it's actually the source. So the donor worked at the plant, and she donated this photo, the TH 2014 10.1, and she's third row, fourth from the left. So I believe it would be this individual, third row, fourth from the left.
Yeah.
The picture in the middle, this is the GC nitroglycerin crew. And for this one, we do have the names associated with those individuals who worked there. So with the photo, the previous one that I showed and this one, because we're seeing women in the manufacturing, it must be 1943 or on, not dated 1941 or 42, because we knew that women weren't in the production line at that time. And then 8640.3, this is just identified as Cordite crew. The source's sister is actually in this picture, front row on the left. So that is the person who donated this image, that is their sister. This one is a picture of, it's identified as GP Flood, an employee at the Cordite plant, and it was taken apparently June 15th, 1945. That's written on the back of the photo. The middle photo is actually of Cordite plant employees in front of the fire hall, and you can just make out in the image, it says fire hall right here. And the third photo, this is actually the fire crew at the Cordite plant. And this one is identified as a black and white framed photograph of Cordite plant workers, World War II. And in this one, actually, we have most of the names of the individuals in this photograph, because the names were on the back. What I don't understand with this one is there's a lot of people in uniform, which I don't, and there's men and women in uniform, but working at Defense Industries Limited was a civilian position. So I don't know if this was why these people are in uniform. This one, it's very interesting to me and like to sort of do a little bit more digging.
Perhaps it was, you know, local boys who were heading overseas or were on leave, and it was, you know, they were touring the facilities, kind of like a, you know, this is what's going on behind the scenes, you know, we're really doing our bit to help you guys over there, you know?
Yeah, it's yeah, and also in this one, no, it doesn't, there is
a reference apparently to a Roland Carriere thought to be Rosie the Riveter.
Or to be like Canada's Rosie the Riveter. That's what it's written on the back of the photograph. I don't even know. Well, it says that this is the Cordite Plant Workers Transcona. So very interesting. This one would definitely be fun if we could find some more information on.
And find out who she is.
Yes.
Research rabbit hole.
Yes. So as I was doing research on this, I found reference to a man who was accused of murder working at the plant. So obviously the plant had high security, and people were fingerprinted before or when they applied to work there, and then they had security screenings and stuff. So there was a man who was arrested after his fingerprint check came back because he was wanted for arrest in a murder that happened in 1925. So in 1925, a man named Andrew
Kazmarek
was murdered in Detroit by 4 men. The men robbed Mr. I'm just going to John each time.
Mr. Kaczmarek.
And then they killed him. Those men then forged an order at the bank and withdrew $11,577.86 that the victim had deposited in the bank. So in 1927, Detroit's former superintendent issued a warrant for the capture of Alexander Daniluk, aka Alex Stone, aka Kamenov. So another one of the men had been arrested. So I'm thinking that's possibly how they figured out Alex Daniluk. So there was no trace of him until July 22nd, 1944, when he applied to work at the Cordite Plant and his fingerprints were taken. He actually worked at the Cordite Plant for 2 weeks. His fingerprints corresponded with those registered in Ottawa by the Detroit police. And then the Winnipeg detachment got to work investigating, and he was arrested in his home. So the identification came back positive that these fingerprints matched the Alexander Daniluk with the man who was wanted in Detroit. So the U.S. authorities were communicated with. Extradition proceedings were immediately started. So you can see in the second article, the hearing was halted. They were waiting for the U.S. to send more information so that he could be extradited. But Alexander was actually discharged when the prosecution failed, or when were unable to produce the person who took his fingerprints in 1927. So he was actually let out, and I could find no other reference to him. So it appears he got away with murder.
On a technicality.
Yeah. So that was really interesting to sort of fall down this little rabbit hole to try to find out. And actually, the information on the RCMP actually published in their yearly report, like this is almost like a case study now of if they couldn't produce the person who originally took his fingerprints, even though they match, something about not being able to positively identify him. Interesting. There was a baby born at the Cordite Plant. So it wasn't one of the workers who was pregnant and went into labor. What happened is the mother was in labor and her husband worked at the Cordite Plant, and they were driving in from Beausejour to go to the St. Boniface Hospital. And they barely made it to the plant to pick up essentially they were going to pick up the husband and go to the hospital. And the husband was Mr. Wayne. The car arrived at 12:47 and stopped right in front of the hospital. And 3 minutes later, the daughter was born. So this is actually a photo from the Cordite Review talking about that, just saying like, this is very unusual to be happening here. But luckily there was a hospital and everyone was safe and healthy. Just an interesting story to come across. So there was a large number of workers who worked at the Cordite Plant, and there definitely was, from what I can gather, just looking at our archival materials, a big sense of community. So the Cordite Review speaks to picnics that DIL put on, and ball games and bowling leagues and cribbage games, and lots of community events for the staff who worked at the Cordite Plant. There are articles in the Cordite Reviews about couples who met at work and fell in love and got married, and children who were born to the workers at the plant. And oh, look at this great crabapple tree of Mrs. Smith, whose husband works at the plant. So really like its own little community, and you get a really positive feeling like going through all of those, just seeing everything that was done for the workers at the plant. So this is actually a photograph of the Cordite Spitfires baseball team, and they were champions in 1942. Champions of what? I don't know. It doesn't say, but they were champions. And we also have the names of the individuals in these photos. But with the war ending, the plant was, a lot of workers knew that They had a job as long as the war was on, and once the war was over, they didn't know what was going to happen. So 8 days after Japan surrendered, the plant ended production. So that was August 23rd, 1945. So layoffs began as soon as the plant was shut down. Some staff really were holding out, and even the community was holding out that another industry could move into the space. So the Community of Transcona's administration and municipal government lobbied to have another industry move into the already developed area. Another manufacturing plant, another explosive plant, anything to keep jobs in the area. But with the fast construction of the plant, like in the building, many were not designed for long-term use. Some of the buildings were torn down and elements were reused in different housing or construction projects, such as the Veterans Village on the U of M's Fort Garry campus. And the Veterans Village can be seen, there we go. These little buildings right here, and then there, that I believe is the Veterans Village. And I got this photo off of the University of Manitoba's, an article that I found there. Other buildings had to be demolished due to the buildings being embedded with nitroglycerin and not salvageable. They didn't want things to explode at a later time. According to the Springfield municipality book, there was considerable waste. As cordite doesn't explode unless it's detonated, it was hauled into a burning pit. The powerhouse was demolished. 2 long chimneys were weakened on one side and dropped into 2 long trenches. In the center section, there was a large burning area. Buildings were demolished with a bulldozer and burned. Little was sold. As destruction continued, some of the residents living nearby complained of their homes vibrating and being affected. There were people who did complain of their front windows being damaged and bricks cracking during the demolition. Now, while I did say that there was only one death that happened while the plant was in operation, that's not quite true of after. There were a number of injuries and deaths that happened at the plant during demolition. And it was during demolition and beyond. So this news article here, 2 Die in Dynamite Blast, it was 2 men, Ronald Rendola and William Wayne, the same Mr. Wayne, whose daughter was born at the plant just about a year and a bit before this happened. He was actually killed in this explosion. And I only put those 2 things together yesterday afternoon while I was putting finishing touches on this. But they were blasting at the sewage disposal unit, which was half a mile from the main gate. So the plant was being demolished by the War Assets Corporations, and men were placing explosive shot into blast holes in the cement when a box of dynamite sticks exploded beside them. Both men were experienced blasters. Mr. Wayne had worked at the plant for 5 years. As I mentioned, his daughter was born at the plant. The work was being done by contractor P.E. Yeager in charge of operations. So a few days after this, there was like an inquiry, and the information in the paper stated that it was determined that a premature explosion of dynamite happened. Ben Baxter, the engineer in charge of the demolition, said that a defective detonator cap must have prematurely exploded during the premature explosion of the charge during tamping. So one man would have placed a stick of dynamite with a cap and a fuse into each of the holes, while the other man would fall behind and place another stick in the hole and tamp on the earth to seal it. It appeared that when Mr. Wayne was tamping the hole that the charge fired. A box containing enough explosives to charge the remaining 5 holes was also set off in the blast. Previously, the men had dynamited 16 buildings each with complete success. So that was definitely a sad day.
A little bit of a shock.
Yeah. Another instance of a man who died during demolition, the 1947, a 36-year-old man died after he fell 30 feet at the plant. Earl Forsey, who was an employee of the Dominion Bridge Company, was working on demolishing a building, and he was working on a steel girder, and it appeared he lost his balance and fell. In June 1948, Louis Searson was cutting a piece of pipe which had come from the Cordite plant when some solvent recovery equipment, which was used in the Cordite manufacturing process, ignited from the torch. So Mr. Searson was injured and several windows in the building were damaged, but it appeared he did survive that one. So what they had thought, like maybe we can't recycle all these buildings and all these materials because they might be explosive, was actually true. Yeah. That it did happen. And that had been a real concern, and obviously it was very valid. And then part of the plant was actually used as a Japanese internment camp. So from July to October of 1946, the staff house, which hadn't been removed yet from the Cordite plant, housed over 200 displaced Japanese Canadians from British Columbia. And the staff house was converted to hold approximately 70 families. So after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Canadian government had a policy of forcibly relocating Japanese Canadians into internment camps or forced labor camps. Those restrictions were not lifted until 1949. Between 1942 and the surrender of the Japanese army in September 1945, over 1,000 Japanese Canadians were moved to Manitoba. It appears the internees fared better in Manitoba than in other parts of Canada. The Premier's office was against the policy of forced removal and stated that their Canadian citizenship should be the same as that of all other Canadian citizens, which carries unrestricted freedom and movement in Canada. So after October of 1946, I don't know where these families were moved or what happened.
I did hear that some of them may have been relocated to camps in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. And if you look in the article, it said that the plant had cut off water and other facilities to the large home buildings, so it was not pleasant living conditions at all for these individuals. So not a great time in Canadians' history.
No.
Canada's history. So what remains today? Today, little remains. Some people that we've met here at the museum are still reluctant to talk about the plant because they were told it was top secret. They weren't allowed to talk about it. Interestingly, in 1949, Bruce Eady, so he was one of the individuals whose land was expropriated, he repurchased a portion of the section from the War Assets Committee. So this is an image that appears in the book Abandoned Manitoba, From Residential Schools to Bank Vaults to Grain Elevators by Gordon Goldsborough in 2006. And it shows the Cordite plant. So these, some of the foundations of the buildings. This is the Cordite ditch, which ran water to the plant. So it's just showing what little remains today. And you can see some outlines here of where buildings may have been or roads. It's quite interesting when you can see an
aerial shot.
Yeah, you can see a bit more than what you can see from the ground. So now we're going to turn off our presentation and actually show you some of the artifacts that we have in our collection here at the museum. As I just get going with this. So bear with me for one moment. And you should just be able to turn on the camera. So again, if you have any questions about the presentation, you can leave us a comment on Facebook or leave a comment here in the chat. Just trying to get the other camera on. Okay, so the very first thing that you see is actually the hammer. Here, this is a hammer that was donated to us that was apparently used at the Cordite plant, and apparently it's made out of beryllium, which is a non-sparking metal. so the hammer would not cause any sparks, and it was used for sealing up crates to ship the cordite and items out. Okay, what next?
Well, the sign is visible here.
Okay.
Move the camera over a bit.
So this is a sign that was actually previously on the fence at the Cordite plant. Remember, there was an 8-foot tall fence that went around the plant. So it says trespassing prohibited, enforced by armed guards. It does look like there are bullet holes in it. Apparently those were put in after the plant had closed, not during the plant. Although an interesting story I did hear from an individual who came into the museum was because a lot of the buildings were underground and they had lights everywhere, a pilot was flying and got confused and thought the Cordite plant was the airport and landed a plane at the Cordite plant. Now this was just an oral history that I received from an individual, but apparently it was quite the stir and people didn't know if they were being attacked or what was happening. Yeah, so there were armed guards there. The next thing that you can see is actually, this is a piece of the fence that was actually at the, seeing you and not pictures. Okay, what I'm going to do, looking on Facebook, they can see the images as well. So we have two cameras on at the moment, so you might need to swipe. We had a comment from someone who's watching us on Zoom that they can only see me and not the picture. So you might need to swipe over to see the other camera that is on. Sometimes that happens with other devices. But the piece of fence that is there was actually a piece of the fence at the Cordite plant. And last time I drove by, which was a few years ago, there are some sections where you can still see the fence. Some sections, there's still some of the fence remaining. In other sections, it's been taken down.
Some room here.
The next few things we have are archival documents. So that is a safe worker card given to an individual who worked at the Cordite plant.
It says the record of over 1 million man-hours worked without lost time injury.
And safety was a big, obviously a very big thing. And in the Cordite reviews, there's lots of references to, if we all work safely, if you're on time, we can do more, we can help out more. So you're doing your part by being on time and working safely. So this one is just a brief sort of information little pamphlet talking about the pay system, the train. So that actually has the train schedule on it on the cover. If you're late, grievances, procedures, vacation plans. So just a quick overview of some of the benefits to working at the plant. But also with this one, this is actually the general and special rules of Defense Industries Limited. Now, they actually had a number of plants across Canada. So I think this book is for all of them and not specifically just Transcona. For anyone who worked at a DIL plant, Defense Industries Limited. But it talks about safety, it talks about smoking, it talks about
influence of liquor.
Yeah, you're not allowed to drink while you're at work. Clean up after your workstation before you leave, things like that.
Horseplay and running.
So
horseplay and fooling, scuffling, throwing articles, unnecessary shouting, and other loud noises which may take attention of other employees from their work is positively prohibited.
Yeah. I quickly planned through it to see if there was anything on appropriate footwear, because sometimes we have some a collective agreement from the shops and it says men have to wear steel toe boots but women have to wear high heels or something. So I was looking to see if there was anything like that. This is the next lot is a lot of our Cordite reviews. So these were the the plant newspapers, newsletters that were produced that gave information on the different jobs. That part of a thing that they had at the Cordite plant was if you could figure out a way to do something better, to be more efficient, you could actually win money, and they'll start doing things your way. So that's someone won, die house operator wins $237 award, because I think he was able to do something. He wrote an idea and submitted it, and it was approved. So he was awarded some money from that. So there's examples of that throughout all of these Cordite reviews. This is where, you know, there's information on sports teams and company picnics, and these are the people who are working in this area, and these are the people working in this area on this shift. So another way to build that community. They're great references to have, and a lot of information, especially about like the day-to-day and who worked there. I did get a lot of information from those. Oh, and that is the original hand-drawn map that you saw earlier in the presentation. Now, prior to newspapers being available online, which a lot of the research I did, I was able to find a lot online, is we have some copies of photocopied microfiched newspaper articles, because for a long time that was the only way we could get stuff like that. Now I was able to access through the Winnipeg Public Library digitized newspapers and search their collections. So a lot of the images you saw of articles, that's how I was able to gather those. We don't actually have a lot here in the museum in our collection related to the Cordite plant. And then this is an individual's handwritten sort of biography of them when they worked at the plant. So that's basically all we have on the Cordite plant. I did also use this book, Abandoned Manitoba. So this is the From Residential Schools to Bank Vaults to Grain Elevators. And I also did use the book Springfield, the First Rural Manitoba Municipality, or that's close to the name of the title of the book. I can't quite remember. We refer to it as the Springfield book. That had some information of individuals sharing their own personal experiences at the Cordite plant. But that's essentially it. So if anyone has any questions now, be happy to hear from them. If you have a question on Facebook, you can leave it in the comments. If you're watching us on Zoom, you can leave it in the chat, and we'll take any questions that anyone has. And while we're waiting, if anyone's going to ask a question, so this is our last small talk for 2 weeks, and then we're going to come back in August
17th. It'll be Snapshot Part 4. So look at 1960s Transcona through our St. Vital Negatives collection. And then the week after that will be Icons of Transcona. And then the last talk in August will be the Transcona Connection. So same time, 12 noon, here on Facebook Live or Zoom. So all you have to do is just RSVP for the Zoom link through our website.
Yes, or you can just watch it on Facebook Live. Today we had a little bit of a technical difficulty going from Zoom to Facebook, but thank you everyone for being patient and just waiting with us while we got that going. But I'm not seeing any questions come in through Zoom, and I'm not seeing any come through on Facebook. So with that, we're just going to say thank you for joining us today. We hope you have a great day, and we'll hopefully see you next time.
And if you missed the talk, just real quickly, we will be posting it on our website, on Facebook, on our YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it and share it after the fact.
Yes. All right. Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.